And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us here on a Wednesday evening. Hope you guys had a great day. But in the world of sports, anyway, it never stops moving. The trade deadline is just about a couple weeks away, anyway. February 9th, we'll be live for you guys all day long to bring you guys the latest from the NBA as it happens. We'll break down every single trade, what it means for both sides, who ultimately wins the trade, and ultimately what happens after that. Do they make another deal? Do they try to, sign somebody in free agency? Does this free a cap space up? Does this make them a contender? All those questions we'll answer for you guys live on the 9th. So make sure you join us at any point during that day. We'll keep you guys updated throughout the day as to what's going on. But make sure you hit that subscribe button. Join us here on YouTube at the Upside Sports Network. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. That way you're notified whenever we do go live. Also, whenever we post a short video or another type of video out there to keep you guys updated on what's going on around the NBA. We also cover the MLB. Hot stove season was very good to us here at the Upside. Got a whole bunch of you guys joined up here and kept you guys updated as much as we possibly could. We're not stopping there. If anything big happens, we will keep you guys informed as well. NFL playoffs are here. Conference championship weekend anyway. We'll see who comes out on top. Mahomes versus Burrow. Hurts versus Brock Purdy. And then, of course, in the NHL, trade deadline is coming up here in about a month. Month plus, anyway, we'll call it. But we've seen quite a few moves made already. We saw a trade just a few moments ago. Matt Nieto being traded between the Sharks and the Avalanche. So things are starting to percolate there. But on the NBA front, not much has happened so far. We already saw the trade for Rui Hachimura going to the Lakers from the Washington Wizards for 3 second-round picks. Now, in the interview with Rob Pelinka after the trade was made, he said they wanted to get something done. They'd been basically had a whole bunch of irons in the fire and just wanted to get something done so far. But he was one of their top targets here at the trade deadline. They still are not done by any stretch, according to Rob Pelinka. They just want to do whatever makes sense to make them a championship team, not just a play-in team, but a championship contender. We'll see if they have what it takes. But his statements basically echoed the sentiment around the NBA right now, is that the trade market really is kind of slow developing. You got a whole bunch of new GMs in those roles around the league that have replaced GMs who had been in their roles for 20-plus years, and we're starting to see the maturation of those general managers as they try not to, give up on a player too early, etc. They're a little bit nervous, tentative as they go into this trade deadline season, and the experienced GMs are starting to make a little bit more hay. Pelinka's now been the GM for the Lakers for a few years now, so he's gotten his feet wet, and he's gotten more comfortable in his shoes there in LA. Of course, he has LeBron and AD, and they're always trying to push for a championship, so they were able to quickly make the decision to, hey, even though we're not necessarily a number one seed right now, we still can try to push it, and when we have LeBron James, you can never really count us out in a playoff series, is what their thinking is. We'll see if that's correct as we go into the postseason of this year's NBA playoffs. But we'll see what ends up happening here at the deadline. So far right now, just looking around the landscape of the NBA, the Phoenix Suns are set to be sold before the NBA trade deadline. Robert Sarver is selling his portion of the team. It sounds like the price could be around $4 billion. So kind of good for that story to kind of get resolved there. Welcome back, Declan. Appreciate you for joining us. So that's kind of one of the other news items from today. We saw yesterday, anyway, that the Cam Reddish sweepstakes were starting to heat up with the likes of the Dallas Mavericks being involved. Pretty much teams in need of wing help were all interested in Cam Reddish, the Milwaukee Bucks, Miami Heat, among others. We'll see what ultimately happens with him. Jay Crowder, who hasn't played at all so far this year for the Phoenix Suns, he will be moved at some point before the deadline. The asking price at the beginning of this season was a first-round pick. They obviously were not getting that. Maybe a rotation piece to come in and play the role of what Jay Crowder did last year might make some sense, but I don't think that's going to happen either. I think they're ultimately going to have to end up settling for a couple of second-round picks in return, especially when you consider he hasn't played at all this year. Could he come in and make a big impact on whatever team he goes to? Absolutely, but it's still a gamble, especially considering you got to worry about his conditioning. Is he in game shape? How long is it going to take him to get in game shape? Those kinds of things once you ultimately do make the trade for him. But just before the Hachimura trade was consummated anyway, there was a three-team trade that would have sent Crowder to Milwaukee, Hachimura to Phoenix, and picks anyway going to the Wizards. We'll see if they ultimately get something worked out between Jay Crowder and possibly going to the Milwaukee Bucks. We've seen Serge Ibaka's name being floated out there as far as a guy who might be traded here at the deadline. Maybe there's a fit there, sending Ibaka and picks back the other way to the Phoenix Suns. But Phoenix is looking for guard help right now. The injuries, the longevity of Chris Paul's career are just starting to add up, and they just want to have some insurance, it sounds like, at the guard position. So we'll see where they ultimately decide to make some additions during this trade deadline season. Who's the best player on the trade market? Ooh, that's a good question. Currently on the trade market, for sure, would probably be Gary Trent. He's got to be up there. Bogdanovich from the Detroit Pistons has got to be up there. Now, as far as players who could be moved, this is the category I would put that most of these players in. The guys like Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, basically the Chicago Bulls team, the Toronto Raptors team, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, etc. Then you're looking at kind of wild cards that could be out there. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, players of that ilk. If Damian Lillard demands a trade because, yet again, they find themselves outside of the play-in tournament looking in at the moment. But it's a very jam-packed Western Conference at this back half of the playoff picture right now. Only a couple of games separate teams from basically 5th all the way back until spot 12, something like that. So it's very tight out in the Western Conference right now as far as the back half of the playoff picture. That's going to take some time to sort out. We'll see if some teams decide to go ahead and declare themselves sellers and make it easier. But Jakob Poeltl is another player from the San Antonio Spurs, more defensive player. That would be a good name on the market. The Indiana Pacers anyway have been long rumored to be willing to move a guy like Miles Turner or a Buddy Hield for cost savings, first round picks. With the success that they've had with Tyrese Halliburton and the negotiations that they've had with Miles Turner, it sounds like they would like to hold on to both players, possibly reach a contract extension, or maybe even allow Miles Turner to go straight out to free agency and then try to re-sign him at that point. But they're very comfortable just holding on to him through the deadline, and I don't think we're going to see anything really move there. Mike Conley's another name that could move from the Utah Jazz. We've seen the Clippers involved in those discussions. We'll see if anything happens there. There's a lot of teams that could use guard help, but Mike Conley's salary might be a little bit of an impediment there. The only name that the Jazz are willing to hold on to right now are William Kessler. I want to say Walker Kessler somebody anyway. The first round pick that they got from the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Rudy Gobert trade, and Lauri Markkanen. Either than any other player outside of that, they're willing to discuss, including Jordan Clarkson. That includes Jordan Vanderbilt anyway. That includes any one of their other players that they have. Colin Sexton, who signed that sign and trade deal to get that deal done for Donovan Mitchell this offseason. He could be a guy that would have interest around the league. Good scoring percentages right now, 40% three-point shooter. We'll see if he ultimately is traded here at the deadline, but he would be a name to keep an eye on for teams looking for cost certainty, control, those kinds of things. The Cleveland Cavaliers are looking to make a move for a 3 in the lineup. They've struggled to find anybody to play that spot in their lineup. They've tried Isaac Okoro, they've tried Karis LeVert, they've tried Lamar Stevens, Cedi Osman. None of them have really worked. They had Lauri Markkanen there, somebody who was playing out of position at the 3 spot last year. He really thrived in that role. That's kind of why I think they view Bogdanovich as kind of a better version of that to kind of come in and play that spot for him. Would be a defensive liability like Markkanen was at the 3. The other option that they've been scouring is Tim Hardaway Jr. of the Dallas Mavericks. We'll see how that ends up going. Welcome in, Ryan. LeBron getting traded to the Cavaliers and Curry getting traded. No and no. LeBron is actually not eligible to be traded, even if he demanded a trade right now, until after the season. So we'll see if he ultimately gets moved. As far as Curry, that's never going to happen. Why are the Thunder considering trading Gilgeous? Well, he's got 5 years left on his deal. He's just signed that massive extension with the Thunder. They currently sit right in that play-in picture right now, where they're part of that logjam between 5 and 12 in the Western Conference. Just because of the money involved, they have some good young picks coming, and the future ammunition that they could get, I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander might be the next person out in Oklahoma City. Does that mean he's not a great player? No, I just think that he doesn't necessarily fit the next timeline for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think we're just on the verge of getting a nice core there, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is still very young, so don't get me wrong about his age being too big of a factor. I just think that they want to monopolize the assets that they have right now and try to cash in as much as they possibly can. Teams that are borderline playoff teams that could have this trade go one way or the other, where those picks might be a little bit more valuable, especially when you consider that you could get swaps in addition to unprotected first-round picks. Something like that could change the course of a franchise with just one player, and they've done that with a couple of different players already. So moving Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be kind of a throwing their timeline back. I would say maybe a year, but that kind of fits with the the injury that they had to Holmgren before the season even began. They have a guy, Josh Giddey, who could take over the rock for them in OKC. I'm very curious to see if they end up going that route. I don't think there's any real momentum for that kind of a deal right now, but that's a name, if you're looking for a superstar to move here at the deadline, that you might want to watch with at least one eye on him just in case something starts to happen. But we'll see how things go. I do think Oklahoma City, in all likelihood, would prefer to build around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but I do think that there's a real chance for him to be moved because they seem to really like to stockpile picks. And when you're in Oklahoma City, you can't necessarily count on a player's loyalty. We've seen that, or they've tried to do that before with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, and it just didn't work out. They tried that with Paul George as well. Again, these things just didn't work out in their favor. That's why I think the asset management game is where they really do best. And eventually, enough of these first round picks are going to get them into the back half of the playoffs, and yet they're still going to have those draft picks left that they could turn around and invest in a guy like, say, the Toronto Raptors did when they made the trade for Kawhi Leonard for 1 year, make one really big run at it 1 year, and then still have a good factory of talent coming in behind that. But what's the biggest name that I think will actually be moved? Not a lot of people are fans of this one just because they don't see the momentum towards it yet, but I would be surprised if the Chicago Bulls kept their team as currently constructed. I do think Coby White will be moved here at the deadline. I think there's an outside chance Alex Caruso does as well, but they've got to figure out their team chemistry. They've tried working Vucevic at the 5. It hasn't really worked to the best of its ability anyway. Patrick Williams has some nice shooting numbers. He just doesn't shoot it enough. They've asked him to do a lot on the defensive end of the floor to make up for LaVine and DeRozan as they tried to, jockey for control of the ball on offense, which is, again, we'll get to that in just a moment. But he's a guy who could use more run on the offensive end of the floor, considering how good his numbers have been, the growth of his offensive game this year. But I think the Bulls need to reset that team just a little bit. I told you at the time when they signed that extension or the 5-year max deal with Zach LaVine that this was basically the ceiling, was that they're going to be maybe a number 5 team in the Eastern Conference, lose in the first round, and that's about it. Well, even before they get to that point, they were struggling to make the play-in tournament right now, and they could, of course, still make it. They have too much talent on that team to not make the play-in and ultimately make the postseason. But they're going to get swept, or a gentleman's sweep at the very best anyway, from whichever team they face in that first round, whether it be Brooklyn, Boston, one of those elite teams in the Eastern Conference. And right now, they just really have nothing going for them. They've had infighting, they've had team meeting after team meeting, player-only meeting after player-only meeting, and it's just not really gotten any better. LaVine's numbers have certainly improved as we've gone month by month, but I think they need to solve their problem internally, and they might have to do it by ultimately trading one of those two players. Just seems like the two of them butt heads, whether it be in the locker room, whether it be their style of play on the floor. LaVine, more of a high-flyer, athletic, jack it up from three-point land, otherwise I'm going to the rack. DeRozan's more of a mid-range game. He's developed a little bit better of a three-point shot over the last couple of years, but he's not nearly the three-point shooter that LaVine has been, and I think they need to resolve that issue on their team. DeRozan, of course, is the older player, but I think he's got the respect of that coaching staff, so I'm wondering if they ultimately lean the direction of trading away Zach LaVine. But if I'm in the Chicago Bulls front office, I need to decide which direction do I want to go. Do I want to go with the DeMar DeRozan-led team? Do I want to continue with this experiment? Or do I want to go ahead and move Zach LaVine? But either way, whichever way they end up choosing, they need to make a decision, and fast. Tim, welcome in. What do you think the Mavs are looking at? I think they're literally looking at everything right now. Anything from a defensive upgrade to trading off some salaries to moving around some assets to going out there and trading 3 first-round picks to get a star player in there. They're looking at literally all avenues out there. They had some interest in Emmanuel Quigley from the New York Knicks, they have some interest in Cam Reddish as well. The Knicks have some interest in Reggie Bullock, of course, who's having a down year from the Mavericks, or for the Mavericks anyway. But the Mavs really respect his defense, those type of intangibles. But they're struggling on the defensive end, and somebody's going to have to be held accountable one way or the other. I think the loss of their only rim protector in Maxi Kleber is really starting to hurt them on the defensive end, and it's really starting to show. Now with Christian Wood out, they really don't have a big man down low who can provide them a consistent scoring punch. They don't really have a second banana outside of Dinwiddie and Hardaway on the floor right now. They need to solve their offensive issues and their defensive issues. They need somebody to play off the ball. When they need Doncic to at least play off the ball at least some. They need somebody to come in and be a secondary ball handler when he's on the floor. When Dinwiddie's on the floor, I think they need to have another point guard out there. That way Dinwiddie can allow that three-point shot to fly with a little bit more of an ease on it. He has a good he has a good shooting percentage anyway from three-point this year, but they need to resolve their issues as far as ball movement, star ability anyway, overall talent on the roster. So maybe a trade of Bullock and for Cam Reddish. And maybe something else coming back. Quigley, I think, is a little bit too valuable for Bullock, but maybe you can convince the Knicks to go ahead and say you send Bullock and a couple of second-round picks to get your first-round pick back and Cam Reddish. That might be a little bit too rich, coming from a Mavericks fan, but something like that would be an enticing trade for both sides, I believe. The Knicks still get their, couple of draft picks out of it. The draft pick, if they ultimately get the first round pick this year, the only thing it does for the Mavericks is just hurt their chances of making a star player trade this trade deadline season, because then they would be held to only the 27 and 29 first round picks. Once the trade is consummated, or once the trade deadline goes past, then we can see them move first-round picks after that. But they've got some questions to answer. I'm curious to see which way they go. They made Tim Hardaway Jr. available here at the deadline. The Cavs have been one team that have been interested, along with a number of other teams who are looking for wing help, including the LA Lakers. Maybe you can pry away a first-round pick, but we'll see how things go. Toronto going to get shaken up like Siakam leaving. I do think Toronto is going to get a little bit of a shakeup. Fred VanVleet turned down a 4-year, $114 million contract extension with the team. They are looking to trade Gary Trent Jr. His numbers are also starting to improve as well, but he isn't necessarily a defensive stopper, plays a little bit smaller. He's 24, so he's got some good youth and good upside left in him, but they're just not a winning basketball team, a top 5 team in the East right now. And I think the Raptors would really like to add another high quality player around Scotty Barnes, whether that be another playmaking guard, whether that be another center. They'd be happy with either one. OG Anunoby is another player that could be moved for them. But I think that the Toronto Raptors are one team to keep an eye on. If they don't get the extension done with Fred VanVleet, say by the next week, I think we could see Fred VanVleet moved here at the deadline. He's not exactly an over-the-top contract to move, and he could get you a first-round pick in return. That would be invaluable for that team as they've tried to get centers in there. Maybe you package a couple of first-round picks after you trade VanVleet for one of the top centers on the market, like a Podol. They've had interest in him. That ideally would cost 2 first-round picks for the San Antonio Spurs, and maybe sign him to an extension, $20 million plus a year, something like that. Finally solve your number 5 position. But I don't think Siakam will leave unless it's for an even bigger star than Siakam. Siakam's a very good two-way player. He fades away during games at times. He just disappears on the floor. You don't always know where he is because he's not always making an impact on both ends. But when he decides to put his mind to it, he's a very dynamic player. I am a Rangers fan. Curious to see the Texas Rangers, I'm guessing, is what you're referring to. We'll see if they get something done as far as left field, but sounds like Brian Reynolds will not be moved, at least before the season, from the Pittsburgh Pirates. Jurickson Profar is probably the top free agent out there. But we're starting to see a lot of injuries around the NBA right now kind of resolve themselves. Bobby Portis of the Bucks is now going to miss some time due to MCL sprain. We reported last night that Kevin Durant was about a week or two away. Danny Green is about to make his season debut. Jonathan Isaac for the Orlando Magic finally made his debut for this season. He hasn't played since the 2020 season, and he's making roughly $17 million per season during that time frame with the Orlando Magic. So it's good for them to finally have him back on the floor. They are looking for some veteran help here at the deadline. We'll see if they make something happen. Teams could have interest in Isaac now that he is finally healthy, but I'm sure they would love to see how he's healthy the rest of the way before they finally decide to make a move for him. So we'll see if he ultimately gets moved here at the deadline or after the season. But I do think he'll be readily available. The Orlando Magic do have Mo Bamba anyway available on the trade market as well. I know a lot of fans out there are thinking, "Oh yeah, Mo Bamba, he's a great player," and he is, but he keeps getting passed over on the depth chart on a rebuilding team. That has red flags all over it, but his numbers are pretty good. His per minute numbers are also pretty good. I'm just wondering what the coaching staff down there is seeing, but we'll have to see. If he gets moved here. If I was an Orlando Magic fan, I would not sit there and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to get a first round pick." You're not. You might get one second round pick because right now his non-guaranteed contract for next season might be declined. He's not exactly the impact player that they thought he was going to be, and he might be a journeyman center at this point in his career around the NBA for say the next 6 to 10 years. But that does not net you a first round pick. So Mo Bamba probably going to be moved here at the deadline. I would imagine for a second round pick. Otherwise, the Orlando Magic might just hold on to him and just see if something else happens the rest of the way and he really blossoms. But Orlando's got a couple of 20-point scorers on their roster right now. Some of you may not have known that. Banchero, the first round pick, of course, and then Wagner as well. So they got a nice young nucleus coming, but they don't really have a lot of vets around it. The only real vet on that team is going to be guys like Terrence Ross and Gary Harris is the other one I'm thinking of. But they could use another veteran who can actually play good NBA minutes right now. That's why there were some rumors about the New York Knicks possibly trading Derrick Rose there. Derrick Rose is going to be done right, though, by the New York Knicks. His connection with Tom Thibodeau is very strong. And so if he's going to get moved, I imagine it'd be to a contender that could use him on the floor and not just sit him on the end of the bench or send him to a rebuilding team, unless that's where Derrick Rose wants to go. But let us know what you guys want to know about the NBA trade deadline. A lot of news and rumors out there right now. We mentioned last night about fanspo.com where you guys can kind of play around, just like ESPN's NBA trade machine, play around with the salaries, picks, those kinds of things. You can engineer anything from a 2-team trade. You can sign free agents. You can do a 5-team trade if you wanted to. You can even do NFL trades, etc. But it is not a value calculator. So the baseball trade values site that I showed you for baseball is not the same. That's about player value. Gives you an idea of what players could be worth. The NBA Trade Machine and Fanspo are strictly contract based. So we'll see if something ultimately happens. Here at the deadline. If you guys want to send some of your favorite trade ideas to us, we'll see if we can review them for you. If we don't, comment on the video or comment on your, or send you a message back anyway on the comment you send us, we will talk to you guys about it during our next live. Surprised Lillard hasn't left yet. Portland has been terrible. Portland's been kind of up and down so far this year. They started out as the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They got off to a pretty nice start, but the last month or so has not gone very well for them. Just things are finally starting to catch up. The lack of overall talent. I questioned that at the time the Anthony Simons signing. I wondered if that was the right move for them. He's performed pretty well, especially when you consider, that he was on a terrible team last year and was just getting garbage time buckets and that kind of thing. And that's where I think the value really was inflated in his deal. But because of that deal and other deals like it, like the Gary Payton deal that they signed, even though he hasn't been able to play all year, Nurkic was signed to another 1-year deal. They have guys that are taking up a lot of salary that leaves them a little bit inflexible. They did make the move for Jeremy Grant. He's been a godsend to that team, but yet they're still not necessarily in the top 5 of the Western Conference. They're in that 5 to 12 range again, and they just need something to really go their way. Now, we've seen in the past Damian Lillard's been very loyal to that team, just like we saw C.J. McCollum was also very loyal to that team. McCollum is now in New Orleans, so maybe we see a trade of Damian Lillard at one point or another. There were some headlines when Nico Harrison was hired by the Dallas Mavericks, his connection with Damian Lillard and all the other guys that were coming over or that had contracts with Nike. His now being the GM in Dallas would give them a leg up in those type of negotiations. Try to get some familiarity there, etc. That's going to be for free agents, and the Dallas Mavericks have again struggled in free agency. But maybe there's some secret inside, the business trade talk that Nico Harrison has access to. We'll see what happens here at this deadline. This will be Nico Harrison's second NBA trade deadline. His first one, of course, you want it to be a little bit more tentative, those kinds of things. I think now's the time when we're finally going to see an imprint of what a Nico Harrison team looks like in Dallas. But Dallas absolutely needs to make a move. I'm ready to see what the Rangers are going to do to look like this year. So excited. Okay. I do think the Rangers are going to be very good. I really like what they've done with the rotation. I think they still need to make one more addition as far as a bat, and then I still think they need a closer. I'm still not surprised, or I'm still a little bit surprised that they haven't addressed that. Whether that be going out there and getting a David Bednar from the Pirates, or signing somebody like a Zach Britton or somebody who could come and help them in the second half of the season. But I expect them to at least add one more relief arm to that bullpen. But they're going to have some of those starters who don't end up in the rotation in that bullpen right now. And I wonder if that's how they're thinking about using their bullpen. High leverage guys who can give you a couple innings out of the pen, sit them down for a couple extra days in the bullpen, then run him back out there for 2 or 3 innings. John Morant to the Lakers, never going to happen. John Morant is staying in Memphis. He loves it in Memphis. There's animosity between the Grizzlies and Lakers. It's never going to happen. See what the rotation does, especially DeGrom. I think DeGrom will be very good. I think he's pound for pound the best pitcher in Major League Baseball right now. I think there is a trade up the sleeve of the Rangers right now, though. That's kind of the market they've been looking at for the better part of a month. Like Taylor Hearn as closer. He's a little bit more mercurial as far as command for my taste as a closer per se. Think of the way that Jose Leclerc came up out of the system anyway. He struggled with command as well. He was able to tamp it down as closer, and that's why he was so effective. When those issues started to crop up, that's when he had issues. And I think Taylor Hearn is another guy who fits that realm. I don't think he's ready for the closer role. I don't think he's ready for a setup role, but I think he's ready for, say, like a 6th, 7th inning guy, somebody who could give you some juice out of the bullpen a little bit, those kinds of things. But I think Leclerc is a guy that could get a run at closer this year. I think you're going to get a bunch of retreads out of that Ranger bullpen, guys who've been the closer before. But I still think they need to bring in somebody for the back end, in my opinion, to feel a lot more strongly about this team, because this is a team that struggled in 2 straight years in one-run games. Now, their starting rotation is much better, but I do think they need to solve that issue. Adolis or Thompson in right field. I would say Adolis. Thompson, I think, is going to be your 4th outfielder. Because I think they will bring in somebody to play that left field spot, whether that be Ezekiel Duran, who's having a nice winter ball, or who's been playing winter ball anyway for the Texas Rangers, playing exclusively in the outfield, whether that's via trade or a free agent. I do think somebody will be brought in along those lines to solve that issue. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. Appreciate your all your support over the last month or two. Trying to get this thing going on the NBA side right now as we get to the NBA trade deadline here on February 9th. Feel free to send us any questions that you have, and we'll see if we can answer them. Send us your trade ideas. If you have an idea, for your team to improve here at the deadline, let us know what you would like to have them have, or would you like them to do here at the deadline. Let me go ahead and pop up the screen for you guys real quick. Again, the site I'm going to show you guys is fanspo.com. This one's Hoops Rumors, another great site. I showed you guys MLBTradeRumors.com. That's another site for baseball. This one's kind of the NBA version of that. You guys can check this one out. Welcome back, Charles. Full-time YouTube? Not yet, anyway. Making a lot more content, though, than I have. And going to get back into making even more content now that all my coworkers are back healthy from COVID. So you'll be seeing a lot more content. I'll be off tomorrow, so I'll be making some content for you guys. And in case you guys are just joining us, we'll be live on NBA Trade Deadline Day, February 9th, all day long for you guys. So make sure you guys join us at about 8 o'clock is when we'll start our live. And then we'll see if, how late after the deadline we go, how long those deals start to trickle in. I would never trade Luka if I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan. Never, 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 never. But I do think the Mavericks are one of the most active teams here at the deadline. We saw in the game before the in the pregame before the Atlanta Hawks game in Dallas, the Adrian Wojnarowski anyway was reporting on the activity of the Mavericks here at the deadline. They are one of the most active teams so far, according to him, as far as trade rumors. They have their hands in a lot of different pots out there. In a lot of different pies, and they're just trying to see which deal that would make them a little bit better. We've seen some reporting from Tim McMahon of ESPN that said that Luka Doncic absolutely wants something to get done. We saw both Luka Doncic and Mark Cuban come out and say that's completely false. This is not the first time that Mark Cuban and Tim McMahon have been at odds in a war of words. And basically, Tim McMahon was revoked, or had his press badge revoked anyway. He was banned from watching Mav games live for about a year or so. That has seemed to have been mended to some extent. I wonder if this will have another cascading effect on something like that. But McMahon was the one who had the report. Brad Townsend, one of the Mavericks reporters for the last 20 years, really good insight from him as far as what's going on behind the scenes. He was the one that had the interview with both Mark Cuban and Luka Doncic. Basically, Luka Doncic essentially had conversations with Michael Finley and Nico Harrison. Just having, they're coworkers. They're naturally going to have interactions. They're going to talk about how to make the team better on the floor. They're going to talk about, how Luka can improve off the floor. Those are kinds of things that are going to happen with every single NBA player that's underneath or that's on the Dallas Mavericks right now. And I think Tim McMahon just extrapolated a little bit too much from that and might have overextended what he was intending to say. But seems like he's been pushing, the red alert button that, Luka wants something to happen right now. And while I do think Luka wants to see some improvements, I think all of us would. I don't think he's necessarily, pushing that panic button saying, hey, get me something done right now. I think that it's the media's responsibility to be responsible with their reporting. Things like that can take on a life of their own very quickly. Players who don't request trade requests all of a sudden become the object of negativity from the fan base just because they perceive a trade request is forthcoming. And there's no such thing to indicate that that's happening with the Dallas Mavericks. He's very happy in Dallas. He's looking towards building this team into a championship winner. He's done nothing to show anything other than that as his long-term goal at any point in his career or in his life. And this year so far has been no different as well. Now Tim McMahon might be laying the groundwork for stories to come in the future, and that's understandable. But you have to be responsible with your journalism as well. So take everything you hear here at the trade deadline with a grain of salt. Some of these rumors are going to be a little bit more embellished than say we would like them to be. A little bit more, what do you call them? When you go fishing anyway, the fish starts out this big, and then by the next guy you tell, it's this big. The next guy you tell, it's this big. And by the time the press starts to report it to everybody else, it's like full-blown trade rumor. No, some of these things you're going to get, those type of stories where, hey, we might have interest in this type of a player. Yeah, because you recognize he's a good player, and if he ever became available, great. Same could be said for any player on any team. So make sure you've taken those trade rumors that you see out there with a grain of salt. The other thing I wanted to show you guys here was the fanspo.com. We showed you guys here. It covers both the NBA. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor right above here where I just popped up that drop box there. You see where it says NBA. They cover the NBA and the NFL, so you can check out different draft boards. You can check out mock drafts. You can check out trades. You can check out caps situations. You can check out taxes, those kinds of things as well. You can also post a trade on here and get other people to respond to it. If you guys just want to play around with it a little bit, you can even see, the most or common traded players here at the deadline. Fans just like you who have interest in other players on the market. These are the guys they're trading right now. Guys we've already talked about here: OG Anunoby, Jay Crowder, Fred VanVleet. I haven't mentioned Russell Westbrook. But if the Lakers are willing to do something big here at the deadline, move a couple of first-round picks, bring in Turner and Hield, something along those lines, Russell Westbrook's contract would be the one they'd have to move outside of that. We've talked about Reddish and Siakam, Gary Trent Jr. DeAndre Ayton is now eligible to be traded anyway. We thought before the season anyway, the Phoenix Suns were very interested in bringing in a guy like Kevin Durant. Ayton would have been one of the key pieces going back to Brooklyn in that type of a deal. Obviously, that's not going to happen now, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind for, in future seasons if the Suns ultimately decide to move DeAndre Ayton. That's the type of player they would be willing to move him for. We've talked about Miles Turner. Same thing with Russell Westbrook applies to Patrick Beverley. John Collins cannot be traded right now. Pretty much the Atlanta Hawks have been trying to give him away. He's making $25 million per season for the next 3 seasons. That's just a salary nobody's willing to take. He was originally offered for 2 first-round picks a couple of years ago, a first-round pick last year. Now it's down to a role player, and even at that price, I think it's still a little bit too rich for a team to bite down on that salary. We've talked a little bit about Buddy Hield, Tim Hardaway Jr., Podol. We haven't mentioned Josh Hart anyway, but the Portland Trail Blazers could choose to make some moves around the periphery, especially with Gary Payton coming back. Maybe they decide to offload one of the guards and just see what else they can get done. I'm just hoping they get a good team around him and don't waste his years. Plus, in Dallas, he will never be as big as Dirk in this city without a ring or two. Dirk is a great talent. He was a great individual, great ambassador of the game. My all-time favorite NBA player, even ahead of Michael Jordan. He will always be my favorite player, is Dirk Nowitzki. Um, I do think there's a way Luka could get ahead of Dirk as far as top 5 in the NBA, etc. That type of argument. But he would have to win a ring, and I do think he could win 1 or 2 in Dallas. If they get the right star next to him, we could talk about a dynasty. But I do think before it's all said and done, Luka will win at least 3 MVPs before the end of his career, and we're talking about at least 1, maybe 2 championships, even without him having a second co-star on this roster. But I think if he gets the right co-star next to him, I think he's guaranteed to win at least 1 or 2, and then very likely could win a third if the right star comes to Dallas. So if you're looking for some trade deadline talk, let us know. Send us your trade ideas. We'll see if we can let you know if those ideas are half baked or if maybe you might want to send them on. I know Mark Cuban, when I was a kid, actually answered some of his fan mail. I remember being 10 years old and sending him trade request after trade request after trade request, giving him ideas, and he actually responded to a couple of them. One of them, I think he actually responded to him himself. The first one he responded to, pretty sure it was a press secretary just saying, "Thank you for your interest in our Dallas Mavericks team. Really appreciate you, from the office of Mark Cuban, signed, office of Mark Cuban." The next letter that came, or after I had submitted a few more, I got another letter from the email anyway, and that one seemed to be a little bit more abrupt, seemed a lot more authentic from Mark Cuban, basically saying, "Appreciate you, thanks for the constant feedback, etc." And it actually had Mark Cuban's name at the bottom, not the office of. So that was kind of cool for a 10, 12-year-old me to get back. So you never know who's listening. I'm sure these GMs, cruise these sites just like we do, just for ideas as they're trying to fall asleep. Hey, that's interesting. Maybe I'll take up the office tomorrow. Just kick around the ideas with the guys and see what happens. But have some fun. You're a fan. Be a fan. But thank you guys for joining us tonight. We'll be live for you guys again tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Make sure you guys join us for that. We'll have our MLB live tomorrow. We were going to do it tonight, but things ran a little bit long. We finally got everybody back at work, though, so everything will be back to normal, and we should be back on track with everything else. Expect some videos tomorrow as well. But thank you for you guys supporting us here at the Upside Sports Network. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. You can check it down at the very bottom of the page here. And you can also follow us on, or find our page on Facebook, Upside Sports Network. But you guys have a great evening out there, and have a good one.